If there is one thing we have learned from serial killer cases, it is that when you catch the killer, you already know where the body of the victim is. That's why it is so unsettling that in the case of the disappearance of Kiplyn Davis, the reverse is the case. It has been more than 10 years, and her supposed killer, Timmy Brent Olsen, still hasn't told the authorities where her body was buried. Would they ever get to find out? And why is the killer being so tight-lipped? Keep watching to find out. As always, welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we will be looking at the case of Timmy Brent Olsen. Kiplyn Davis was born on the 1st of July 1979 to parents Richard and Tamara Davis. While not much is known about her early childhood, what we do know is that before she went missing, she was a student of Spanish Fork High School, located in Spanish Fork, Utah. Kiplyn disappeared on the 2nd of May 1995, and at the time, she was only 15. Reports claim that the teenager had a misunderstanding with her parents that day when she went missing. It was said that Kiplyn used to take driving lessons every morning before school, and so she had to get up by 4:30 a.m. every morning. That particular morning, she had been so tired that she was still in bed even after 4:30. Her dad, Richard Davis, noticed that she wasn't up and ready to go to the driving reserve, so he got her up to get up. Kiplyn tried to explain to him that she was too tired and that it wouldn't hurt if she missed her driving lesson that morning. Her parents, however, cajoled her until she got up and left. According to them, they knew how much she had been looking forward to learning how to drive, and they couldn't allow anything to deter her, even for a bit. Kiplyn obeyed her parents, but she was so upset when she left the house. Upon getting to school later that morning, Kiplyn went on her usual tasks, making sure not to miss any of her classes that morning. According to her classmates, the last time they saw Kiplyn was during lunch in the school cafeteria. And although Kiplyn missed the rest of her classes for that day, which implies that she could have chosen to head home earlier, she wasn't found at home either. Apparently, she had told some of her friends that she would not be available to attend the activities they had planned later in the evening on that day, stating instead that she'd rather take the time to run away from home because her parents had gotten her upset in the morning. According to Kiplyn's parents, their daughter would typically return home from school by 3:30 p.m. But that fateful day, she still wasn't home even after they waited until 5 p.m. Alarmed, the doting parents began to look for Kiplyn. Soon, they decided they would go to Kiplyn's church to look for her, and if they didn't find her there, they would then report to the authorities. Unfortunately, Kiplyn wasn't in her church, so her parents had no choice but to report to the authorities. Initially, the police concluded that it was just a regular case with teenagers where they end up running away from home and that Kiplyn would eventually return from wherever she went. Her parents, however, did not share this sentiment, and they tried convincing the police that Kiplyn would never do a thing like that. And when that failed, they decided to keep searching for their daughter on their own. Left with no choice, Richard and Tamara began calling friends of Kiplyn in school and asking if they had seen her. To the couple's dismay, everyone kept saying that the last time they saw her was during lunch and that she had missed the 4th and 5th period in school that day. Kiplyn's parents, fixated on not giving up, reached out to more classmates. Luckily, a classmate named Eli claimed that he saw Kiplyn during 4th and 5th period and that she was taking a fellow classmate named Christopher Jepson. Following this discovery, Kiplyn's parents stumbled upon her diary where she mentioned having a crush on Chris. So they began to wonder if she had gone to Chris's. However, upon reaching Chris's house, Chris's sister was the only one home, and she told them that Chris hadn't returned home from school yet. On hearing this, Kiplyn's parents speculated that the two had probably gone out together and that they would check back in to see if Chris would return with Kiplyn. Kiplyn's parents kept searching for their daughter regardless, and around midnight, they came by Chris's house. According to them, there was a car outside, and they could see that there was a light in the house, which meant that Chris was probably home. But they didn't go in because it was already past midnight, and also because they felt that if Chris had returned with Kiplyn, the family would have reached out to them. The following day, Kiplyn's parents continued reaching out to friends and classmates in the school. They got the police involved again, and this time the authorities began to investigate Kiplyn's classmates. Among those who were investigated are Christopher Jepson, Timmy Brent Olsen, and a close friend of theirs, Davis Rucker Leifson. All three of them had the same story. Chris, who was the primary person of interest at the time, said that he had indeed spoken to Kiplyn after lunch, but he had classes afterward which he left to attend. And after that, he had stayed back in school, specifically in the auditorium, with Timmy and Rucker to hang out and set up the place as it was his job at the school at the time. Despite meeting a dead end with Chris, Rucker, and Timmy, the police got a more interesting testimony that seemed like a useful lead. Another classmate, Brandon, said that he had spoken to Kiplyn after lunch as well. He had asked her out on a date, but the two couldn't go out on a date later because Brandon apparently had a girlfriend at the time, and she got mad when she heard that her boyfriend had asked out another girl. Classic high school drama. Brandon also mentioned that he couldn't find Kiplyn during the 4th and 5th period, so he went out of school to look for her, thinking she might have skipped school because she was upset about the cancellation of their date. To clear his name, the teenager went on to say that when he couldn't find Kiplyn, he decided to skip school altogether, and to prove that he wasn't lying, he told the police that he had called a friend to help him because of a flat tire. Because the police didn't want to rule out anything, they decided to verify Brandon's story. And it turned out that Brandon didn't have a flat tire. He didn't call the friend who he claimed to call. Following this discovery, the police became very suspicious of Brandon. But because they didn't have any evidence, combined with the fact that all the testifiers were minors, left the authorities with their hands tied. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Still, nobody knew where Kiplyn was. As time passed, the local police were forced to recognize the possibility that what started out as a missing person case could be a homicide. Kiplyn's parents were also of the opinion that their daughter could have possibly been murdered. Following her disappearance, some people started spreading rumors about places where Kiplyn's body could possibly be. But, till this day, Kiplyn or her remains are yet to be found. About a year later, it was said that Chris went to Kiplyn's parents out of the blue and kept saying that he didn't do anything. Richard thought there was more to Chris's unexpected visit to their house, so he began to probe further. Chris, however, panicked and left the house. As soon as Chris left, Richard went to the police because he thought that something was fishy. The police also agreed, so they called in Chris and his friends, Tim and Rucker, for questioning. During their interrogation, Tim shared a different statement from the one that he shared a year ago. He wrote that they had driven to the canyon and that he watched Kiplyn and Rucker walk away, but that Kiplyn didn't come back with Rucker. Before Kiplyn's parents could celebrate this new finding, which might have led them to know where Kiplyn's body was buried, Tim immediately changed his statement. It appeared that Rucker had threatened him, warning him about ever mentioning his name in the Kiplyn case. The authorities then decided to carry out a polygraph test. Surprisingly, however, the three passed the test. Years passed, and still, nothing new came up. Chris, Tim, and Rucker had all grown into men. Still, Kiplyn's parents refused to give up. Richard started sending out writings about Kiplyn's case until it got the eyes of the grand jury. With so much publicity, the case of Kiplyn's disappearance began to appear on TV. And this aided in the resuscitation of the case. People began to come out and share testimonies about Kiplyn's death. One time when Kiplyn's case came up on TV, Chris had been partying with friends. When Tim saw the case on TV, he got angry and said that Kiplyn deserved it. Chris's wife also came out to testify that she had been watching a movie, So I Married an Axe Murderer, with Chris, and had jokingly told him to tell her one thing nobody knows he did.
Worst thing you've ever done.
According to her, Chris unflinchingly looked at her in the face and said,
"What if I told you I killed Kiplyn Davis?"
And obviously afterward, he laughed it off, saying it was a joke. While all these new testimonies were coming up, the authorities also found out that the auditorium which Chris, Tim, and Rucker had claimed they were hanging out on in the evening of Kiplyn's disappearance was actually in use. Apparently, a choir performance was going on in the auditorium at the time, but somehow that information missed the authorities for several years. Because several testimonies kept coming up, Kiplyn's parents then decided to declare their daughter dead. She was declared dead on May 2nd, 1995, the day of her disappearance. As for Tim and his friends, the police suspected that they had something to do with Kiplyn's disappearance, but because there was really no evidence, neither were they willing to give out any helpful information. The judge could only charge them with perjury since it was clear that they were all lying about the case, especially since Tim, who took back his statement about seeing Rucker and Kiplyn walking off in the canyon. Tim was sentenced to 12 years, mainly because more of the testimonies had been directed at him. Chris was sentenced to 5 years and Rucker 4 years in prison. To top it off, only Chris and Tim were charged with Kiplyn's murder. In 2011, Tim admitted that he had witnessed the death of Kiplyn and that she had been hit 2 times on the head with a rock. He said that he had driven Kiplyn and the killer to the canyon, and that he watched as the killer, along with Kiplyn, walked out of his sight. After about 40 minutes, Tim claimed that he heard raised voices, and so he decided to go and see what was going on. He saw the killer hit Kiplyn on the head with a rock. Kiplyn fell due to the impact, and the killer, seeing that she fell, rather than doing away with the rock, went on to hit her again the second time. The killer then beckoned on Tim to help so they could move Kiplyn's body underneath some trees. The two then got in the car and left with the plan to return that evening to bury Kiplyn's body somewhere else, which they did. In May 2021, during Tim's trial, Tim refused to say anything in court and only answered questions that were passed by the judge concerning renunciation of his trial rights and to formally plead guilty. His defense attorney later stated that Brent had been feeling remorseful, and so he decided to come to terms with the plea bargain, partly because he wanted to bring closure to the Davis family and his as well. Tim was asked to recount all that transpired the day Kiplyn went missing, which was the standard thing to do at a parole hearing because it shows whether or not the offender could be open and honest with the crimes he committed. Tim refused to say anything, however, saying he would speak to his lawyer first. At this point, Tim had to be reminded that the legislature recently signed a bill that people found guilty of homicide would not be granted parole unless they work with authorities to first recover the remains of the victim. Tim was also told that the governor, Spencer Cox, had also signed the bill into law. Still, he did not budge. In one last attempt to find Kiplyn, Tim was also informed that if he wants to be released from prison early, he has to show board members that he at least put in a great deal of effort with helping to recover Kiplyn's body. Tim kept going back and forth in court that day, and his reluctance quelled Richard Davis to the point that he had to pipe in. Richard pleaded even more with Tim, stating that he thought Tim's heart would have softened after all those years. Tim only replied, saying he's done all that he could and he had nothing else to offer that would change the situation at hand. According to the board members, since Tim refused to help find the remains of Kiplyn, he automatically did not meet the requirements for parole. That therefore means that Tim will remain in prison until 2026. According to the parole board, this decision will only be reconsidered if Brent is willing to help act in good faith in finding the remains of Kiplyn. While we are not strangers to the tales of disappearances, you have to admit that the case of Kiplyn Davis is as unnerving as they come. To this day, there are several speculations about what actually happened to Kiplyn and the reason why Tim continues to keep his mouth sealed, despite numerous pleas. As does with cases like these, questions arise, where all we can do is guess. With that said, what do you guys think about this case? Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the disappearance of Kiplyn Davis, and why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.